What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. Man, you guys have heard me say it a million times, and you're going to hear me say it again. Old Man Logan is probably the best thing coming out of all new, all different Marvel right now. Dude, it's nuts how good this story is. Oh my God, it's so good, man. Like, whew, man, it's good. So, this is actually a one-shot. Issue number 8 is a standalone story. There's really nothing that we need to worry about outside of this, but we do sort of need to know a little bit of history of Old Man Logan. The great thing about this is that I've got videos on it, so we don't really have to do a whole great big recap. Instead, you'll find those videos down in the description. But the great thing about this story too, though, is that even if we did need to do a recap, the story covers all that for us, because this talks about how the supervillains took over the world in the Old Man Logan universe. Oh man, it's not like a great big huge grandiose play-by-play of everything that happened, but it does give us a lot more information than we had before, because all we knew from the Old Man Logan universe was that Wolverine had been tricked into killing all of the X-Men when the Spider-Man villain Mysterio, cast an illusion that led him to believe that all the villains had just, all the X-Men villains had just shown up at the X-Men mansion, but we didn't really know anything aside from that. And so what this does is this bounce back and forth between the past and the present. It bounces back and forth between these two places, and what it tells us is that in the Old Man Logan universe, in the past, that the entire event started when Magneto, along with the Green Goblin, along with Polaris, when they had all, alongside Hydra, just shown up in New York, and Magneto literally just brought down the New York skyline using his powers of magnetism. And I gotta tell you guys, man, that's beast! God, it's so beast. I mean, using his powers of magnetism to just rip everything down, to just bring everything crumbling down. But the other thing too, though, is that this is Hydra. Like, Hydra is with him. Now, having said that, we know that Captain America is a Hydra agent. Steve Rogers is a Hydra agent. What if this happened? Like, what if this actually happened in the main Marvel universe? God, I'd be so hyped. I feel like a kid in a candy store right now. But in any event, we switch over to X-Haven. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that in the all new, all different Marvel universe, because of the whole Mpox thing, because of the Terrigen Mist threatening to wipe out so many X-Men, in response, the Xavier Institute was actually moved to the dimension of Limbo under the control of magic. So that way it actually remains out of the influence of the Terrigen Mist. And what this does is it actually allows, Storm and the X-Men to run these little campaign missions where they just basically show up on Earth, they grab whatever mutants they can, then they just, take off back to Limbo to the X-Men mansion. And because of this, because of the events of Berserker, because of the fallout with Old Man Logan learning about his history, the events in Bordertown and so on and so forth, coming to the full realization that he's not in the Old Man Logan universe anymore, he had effectively joined the X-Men. The kicker to this is that he's still very uneasy because, keep in mind, with such a traumatic experience, living through all these things, remembering the events of Secret Wars, in the mind of Old Man Logan, to quote the popular phrase from Battlestar Galactica, all of this has happened before and all of it will happen again. And that's his line of logic. His line of logic is, when it comes to these two universes in terms of how they coexist side by side, now is around the time that the villains took over the world, that they killed off all the superheroes. And so Old Man Logan is getting more and more anxious as the clock gets to midnight, as the doomsday clock gets 5 minutes to midnight. He's so sure that these villains are going to show up and they're going to take everything over. And so because of this, Jean Grey, of course, remember, this is Jean Grey from the past. This is the all new X-Men Jean Grey. She basically picks up on Wolverine's uneasiness and picks up on the idea that he seems to be experiencing a lot of anxiety. Now, this is kind of a weird thing when it comes to the young Jean Grey and Old Man Logan, because Marvel kind of walks this line here. In some stories, Old Man Logan's like a father figure. In other stories, the indication is that the two of them are going to get together, which is weird, and that's really, really creepy and kind of gross. But the idea here is that even, in some form or fashion, regardless of what direction things take, they do have a very strong friendship. And when Old Man Logan first showed up and Jean Grey kind of ran through his mind on what it is that he was experiencing, she said, look, if that happens, I will be with you every step of the way. I will anchor you to reality. Like, I will be the rock that you can hold on to when the waters of reality begin to become too tumultuous for you to really navigate. I will be the one that'll keep you here and keep you sane. And so what we do is we jump back to Old Man Logan's universe with the supervillains taking over everything, because I know that's all you guys care about. You don't have to lie. I know you guys are like, we just want to see how the supervillains took over the world. We don't care about Jean Grey and Old Man Logan. But what we do is we join She-Hulk and we join Daredevil along with Moon Knight and Punisher. And this is really like a last stand at the Alamo. I mean, you got Captain America there, but it's literally like just a last stand. It's them doing the best they can. And the coolest thing about this is even though Jeff Lemire doesn't give us a ton of stuff here, you can kind of imagine battles like this all over the country, all over the world. I mean, everywhere, you know, everywhere. Because we know in Wakanda this is happening. We know that it's happening in like England with Excalibur. I mean, we know it's happening everywhere, probably in the Savage Land, although nobody cares about Khazar. We know that all these things are happening all over the place. And with Moon Knight being down, we of course have the Punisher that makes his presence known with Daredevil. And the Punisher's like, man, I've never seen this before. I've never seen the villains this organized. Who the hell made them this organized? Who did this? You know, how does this work? But then suddenly he's met by the arrival of, I think it's actually Enchantress, who uses her magic to basically disintegrate him, to destroy him. But then we also have the Punisher who's impaled by Kraven the Hunter. Now, this is something that I want to point out here because this is actually a continuity error. If I remember correctly, Daredevil did not die in the original attack. Daredevil lived, and instead he was forced to fight in the gladiatorial games under the control of Kingpin. Now, that may be a mistake on my part. It could have been that I screwed up, and it doesn't really matter. Either way, it's kind of cool to see Daredevil get disintegrated like this. But we also have Jean Grey, you know, switching back to the modern day. This all really just comes about by Jean Grey taking Old Man Logan around all these places that he remembers. And, you know, when he says they all attacked at midnight, you know, the stroke of midnight is when they launched their strike, when the world was basically sleeping, when no one would expect that to happen. We learned that the reason why this is important is because whenever criminals committed crimes in the Marvel Universe, I don't know if you guys ever noticed, but they almost always happen in the daytime. They almost never happen at night. Not only that, you know, of course, midnight being the witching hour, this is the time when a lot of people are sleeping. This is the time when you're most likely to catch the Avengers unaware. You're most likely to catch them, you know, in their R&R. And so by striking at midnight, you're striking at their most vulnerable because it means they've got to wake up, they got to get ready, they got to get their suits on, and they got to jump into action. They're not already in action. They're not already in the midst of communicating. They got to fire everything up. And so it's just taking them when they're least expecting it, which actually works really, really well because they took over the world. But from here, we jump to Hank Pym. Now, Hank Pym's death is one of the coolest damn things ever, because in the original Old Man Logan story, we didn't know how he died. All we knew was that there was just a giant man skeleton. And what we learn here is that, of course, with Wonder Man down, with Crossbones leading this strike against the Avengers, that almost all of them seem to have been defeated. But instead, the only two that are here that are left of this original group is Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, and Hank Pym. Now, of course, initially Hank Pym says, Janet, get out of here, go to New York, go meet Captain America and them. They're gonna need you to help. We're kind of in the middle of no man's land here. We're just gonna have to give up on Middle America. We're gonna have to try to take it back eventually. Instead, Janet Van Dyne chooses to stay there. And when she does, she's actually attacked and she's killed. She's completely disintegrated with an energy blast. Not only that, we also have Avalanche. Now, this is actually a really funny situation because Avalanche was always like a C-list level character. I mean, he was a C-list level villain that no one ever took seriously. And this is one of the reasons why the plan of the Red Skull and organizing the supervillains the way they did worked so well, because you would never take Avalanche seriously. But when you're 100 feet tall, all it takes is for somebody to disrupt your ability to move and suddenly you come crashing down. And that's exactly what happened. Not only that, we also had Mole Man, who basically had all his Maloids attack Hank Pym. So Avalanche brought him down and the Maloids literally ate him alive, which is a genius way to kill Hank Pym. It's so smart. God, this story is so amazing. Jeff Lemire, you're a beast. But in any event, this is really just Jean Grey trying to assuage the mind of Old Man Logan, but more so than that, making him force his own demons. And in fact, what she does is she takes him to, you know, where the Xavier Institute was in his reality. Now, of course, right now, the Xavier Mansion's not there again, it's in limbo, but taking him to where it used to be in Westchester basically forces him to kind of deal with the idea that he's the one that killed the X-Men, you know, and this is her essentially saying that if it was going to happen, it would have happened by now, right? But there are so many differences. You know, there are so many huge things. Magneto's not a bad guy, Magneto's a good guy. Cyclops was the equivalent of the bad guy. You know, the X-Men Mansion isn't where it used to be. You know, there are a lot of huge changes now. We have new Spider-Man. There are things that just aren't the same, you know, and so it's very unlikely there's going to be a supervillain rise up against all the superheroes. And so she says, what you need is to know that if something like this happens, you're not going to face it alone, that you're going to face it with friends. And this is really important because if the, you know, and Jeff Lemire hasn't really touched on this too much. He hasn't really done a whole lot of offering in terms of how Wolverine existed in the Old Man Logan universe. But if it was anything like the main Marvel universe, it was essentially him being a loner. He was part of the X-Men, but he was apart from the X-Men. You know, he was part of their group, but not really. And so this was really a circumstance where she says, you know, if you're anything like you were before, you were a loner and you felt like you had to deal with it on your own. Not only that, because of the fact that he felt he killed the X-Men, he considered himself to be the scum of the earth because he was one of the contributing factors to the supervillains taking over the world. But she says, hey, look, you have friends here, all right? You know, you've got Steve Rogers, who's in your corner, which, interesting. You've got, you got Jubilee, who is still alive. Now, Jeff Lemire doesn't tell us if she's still a psychic vampire or if she's still somebody that, you know, can do her little plasma things. And even then, I haven't been reading close enough to the X-Men. They may have been reinstating her. If you guys know about that, feel free to post it down in the comments that she's back to her old self. But you've got Hawkeye, you've got Puck from Alpha Flight. I mean, you've got people that Wolverine knew in his life. And these are very important people in his life. It's not like she grabbed anybody. She grabbed important people. Puck was important during Wolverine's time as part of Alpha Flight when he was part of Department K in Canada before he joined the X-Men. Hawkeye's there because of the fact that in the Old Man Logan universe, Hawkeye was the one that literally took him around, that he went on a journey with, basically. It was Hawkeye that kind of reintegrated him into society. You got Steve Rogers there because Wolverine fought alongside him during World War II, and you've got Jubilee because she was the closest thing that Wolverine ever had as a friend, you know, in the Old Man Logan universe and in his own past. And so by reintegrating him in with these people who were so significant in his life, Old Man Logan basically walks away from this saying, okay, it's entirely possible the supervillains will take over everything. It's entirely possible the supervillains will launch an attack and try to take over the world. But if they do, I'm not going to be fighting alone. I've got allies outside of a handful of people in the X-Men. I've got the Avengers, you know, and I've got the X-Men. I've got a multitude of superhero groups on my side. But Captain America Steve Rogers is a wild card, guys, because remember, he is a Hydra agent. So this is actually really cool. And that's what I love about this, because stories like this give us the front face of Steve Rogers. I think really having Steve Rogers here, like, change the entire element of this, because this gives us the front face. This is the face that Steve Rogers shows to the world. But this guy wearing this red hoodie and wearing this blue shirt with a star on the front of it, a white star on the front of it, he's a Hydra agent. He's working against the superheroes. And so when you know that, it changes everything. That's why I say, man, like, Hydra Captain America is the best, like one of the best stories running. Old Man Logan, I think, is the best, but Hydra Captain America is one of the best stories running because it changes everything. Every time we see Captain America in any comic book, it's like, by the way, he's a Hydra agent. In the background, he's a bad guy. He's not a good guy. You just think he's a good guy. And it just makes things so cool. It makes things so awesome. But anyway, guys, if you're new here to Comics Explained, then be sure to hit the subscribe button, become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys are as hyped about Old Man Logan as I am, drop a like and leave a comment down below and let me know what you guys think about Old Man Logan in the all new, all different Marvel universe, man, because Jeff Lemire, God, man, if God was writing Old Man Logan, this is what it would look like right now, what Jeff Lemire is doing right now. Anyway, we're gonna bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.